I mentioned before on an episode of the Vinyl Guide, I recently saw this fantastic music documentary titled I Called Him Morgan, about the life of jazz trumpeter Lee Morgan, his music, and unfortunately his tragic death as well, being shot in a nightclub before going on stage. Now, today we have with us Kasper Collin, who directed the film, which is opening in major U.S. cities in March 2017. Kasper, how are you today?
I'm very fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. We're glad you're here too. You've put together this film, I Called Him Morgan. It's not your first music documentary. In fact, you created one a few years back. My Name is Albert Eiler, about a jazz horn player musician who died under auspicious circumstances in New York in the 70s. I Called Him Morgan is about Lee Morgan, a jazz horn player who died under auspicious circumstances in New York in the 1970s. I'm starting to see a bit of a pattern here.
Oh yeah? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I think
Yeah.
are you building up to a Coltrane or a Bud Powell one? Is that your next project?
A lot of questions like that coming, of course. Is this going to be a trilogy, etc.? We will see, actually. I mean, this is for me, in fact, a coincidence that if you don't know too much about Albert or Lee, they from a distance it can look very very similar. I mean, because they died young and they lived during the same era. But if you listen to the music, they are kind of different, of course. But I mean, for me, it all starts with the music.
Your movies, they're documentaries, but they feel more like art, and they have this very personal touch. Like, the story is not about necessarily Albert and his music and the arc of his life, but it's also his relationships with Donnie and Mary. And same with I Called Him Morgan. The story is not just about Lee Morgan, but it's about the touch points in his life. And you go into the most detail with him and Helen, because it really is a story of him and Helen, and of course how they
Yeah.
intertwine. What's the secret to developing a great music film?
Wow, I wish I knew. Uh,
Well, you're probably closer than most already. Just you've done it
yeah,
twice.
yeah. I'm thinking of the secret recipe, the secret formula here to get it right, so that no one's gonna get back and blame me later that I was wrong if they're following me. So you need to be careful. No, I'm joking, but in a way, it's always a long journey for me. And what I was about to say too, I mean, it started like a passion for this music for me, and I kind of came from that side of the music with more like the experimental rock side and into the free jazz scene, that spiritual jazz, and I was playing free jazz myself when I was in Stockholm and so on. So that journey was very much driven by a passion for me and a curiosity, and I didn't know from the beginning where this would end. And it happened a lot of things on the way that kind of took the project in new directions, and I had to follow that. But with my second film here, I Called Him Morgan, I actually thought that after this Albert Eiler film, I wouldn't really make a film like that again, and spend a lot of time making another film taking place in that era in America, in like the 60s, early 70s jazz scene in New York. So being a filmmaker, I was actually trying to, I was developing, working with other projects for a while. But then it's 7 or 8 years ago now, I was watching YouTube. And I mean, I'm really a great music fan. So I happened to watch a clip with Lee Morgan playing with Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers, and that was a clip that is still there. I know they were performing in Japan, in Tokyo. It was a TV broadcast performance, and they played this classic composition by the piano player Bobby Timmons called "That There," and it was Lee's solo in there that just blew me away. I was incredibly moved by his solo there, and I remember just returning to this clip several times over within a few days there, and it was amazing. And that was the group with Jimmy Merritt on bass and also Wayne Shorter on tenor saxophone. So that was really the starting point. And I up until that point, of course, I know about Lee Morgan, but very generally, I hadn't really been a fan because I mainly know about the Sidewinder, and me coming from more of an experimental side into this, that wasn't really my record or my favorite album or my music at that time. Of course, I know about Blue Note Records, and I've been listening a lot to Wayne Shorter and other artists there, but not Lee. But seeing Lee performing this fantastic solo there, I realized, wow, here we have this incredibly talented, young, searching artist that I didn't personally know too much about. And I found a lot of other great music kind of directly, like this Search for the New Land album. And just was like a personal journey into his music for a while there for me. And I started to think about, is there a film here? And this is when all starts, because I know about at this time that, okay, Lee, he made Sidewinder and he was shot at a club by a woman. That I think is like a general knowledge among music fans, really. But I didn't know more than that. But then when I started a project like this, it's the first stage of research. You're trying to see if there is a possibility to make a film, and you try to see how many people still alive that were close to Lee, for example. You look for archives and things like that. And I realized that there were quite a lot of people still around. And what I do then is that I talk with them. And that was remarkable for me, because when I started to talk to people that had played with Lee and were close to him and so on, almost all of them quite immediately started to talk about the last 4 years in his life. And
this is when he was cleaning up. He'd gone through a cycle where he put out some fantastic records, and from the age really 18 when he put out his first record, he joined the Jazz Messengers, I think, at 22. The first, those years of his life were intense. He was vaulted to the top of his game, and then he got on dope for several years. And then he got cleaned up with the help of this woman, Helen, who was in his life. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that was a very fascinating thing for me. I mean, that's also one thing I know. I mean, that he was this wonder kid. And as you say, I mean, he was actually starting to play professionally in Dizzy Gillespie's orchestra already in 1956 when he was 18. And he was also, I mean, signed for Blue Note Records, which was like the major jazz record company in US at this time. And he was 18 years old, and he made like 5 albums in his own names when he was just 18, 19, like a teenager. It's just like an incredible story. And then he plays with Art Blakey, then makes more records on his own, etc. And then he fell into this addiction, which was very sad. But this thing with Helen, what happened when I met those people that I talked about and talked with them was that they started to talk about those last 4 years in Lee's life. And they were talking about a woman named Helen that I didn't know who that was, and that she had helped him back from his addiction, because those guys around, they felt they couldn't do anything themselves. But this woman stepped in, and there was love going on, and she really nursed him, gave him a place to live, and helped him back step by step. And they met each other late 1967. So from there, he finally came back and had a second act in his career and made new fantastic music. But I realized this is the same woman that later shot him. I didn't know that. And then what I definitely didn't know was that the same woman that shot him was the woman that earlier had helped him when no one else could help him or wanted to help him, really. So that was a very special story, almost like a Greek tragedy, almost, that I felt I fell into, and together with this incredible music that I fell in love with just recently. Then, and this story, I became very, very curious about this.
Now, I don't think I'm giving anything away in the movie because I think it's in the trailer, but the movie is built in large part around a single interview that Helen gave toward the end of her life, telling the story of her and Lee and being very candid, very open with emotion through the good times and the tough times, and then, of course, the end of their relationship where she shot him. How did you come across that gentleman that had that final interview?
Yeah, that's a very special material, and that is also part of the early stage research. I mean, you're trying to see what is this really, this project? Is there a project here, or is there a film here rather? So I found Mr. Larry Rennie Thomas in North Carolina. He had a blog, so I googled him, and and I realized he had made this interview with Helen, which was really something that came out of a chance encounter he had with this woman. And I found him in 2009, and we get in contact, and he sent me this fantastic interview that was made on a cassette tape. And just listening to this recording, then it was not just the story this woman was telling, it was also how she was telling it, the sound of her voice. That was kind of incredible to me, I must say. And I had to work with this material quite a lot, but I realized early on that this was a very important material for the film, and did some more research, and then realized that, yeah, I wanted to build this film partly from Helen's perspective. And I broke down this longer cassette interview into 11 scenes with her voice. So she's kind of narrating this film, a lot of it herself. We can following her from her incredibly upbringing. I mean, she's coming from the southern part of US, from North Carolina, Wilmington, outside of Wilmington, and she has her first child when she's 13 and the other when she's 14, but she know that she do not want to stay down there. So she gives her children to her grandparents and leaves for New York, and turns up in New York and creates a new life for her. So she was a real survivor in a very tough time in America. And then later on, she finds Lee and becomes also his manager. She creates a new life for her, and everything is in this cassette tape. And yeah, unfortunately, it also leads up to this tragic event, that snowy night in February 1972, when she finally then ended Lee's life as well.
Were you able to find many people that were at Slugs that night that actually were able to witness what happened or saw the event?
Yeah, I was. I mean, during my research, I met up first with different musicians then in the kind of key part in Lee's life. It was fascinating to see that for example, those guys that were there the last evening was like Paul West, a bass player who became a friend with Lee already in Dizzy Gillespie's orchestra when Lee debuted, you know. And he happened to be there the last night. But then his band members then was Billy Harper, the great saxophone player, and it was Jimmy Merritt, the bass player that also played with Lee in Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers. And yeah, so those guys are in the film. But I also found, which took quite a long time, there was a new woman in Lee's life called Judith. And with some help, I managed to track her down. She has never before talked about her friendship with Lee. And yeah, she was there that last night too. And she has in a way been blamed for being the new woman in Lee's life and this making Helen upset and so on. So she is there as well in the film. So it's quite an intriguing setup.
It is the type of story that Tarantino would have to weave together, but this actually happened. So I would really encourage folks to, especially jazz fans, people who enjoy documentaries and hearing the stories of artists and musicians, to check out the film I Called Him Morgan. I believe it's showing in theaters in March and April 2017.
What's happening now is the theatrical release of it, and this film had a kind of remarkable start. It took me 7 years to make this film, but then what happened was that it premiered at Venice Film Festival in the start of last fall, and then also played, which is kind of incredible, Telluride, Toronto, New York, and London film festivals, and all within like 5 weeks. That was really a fantastic start for a film. So now it's finally time for its theatrical release, and it's starting at Lincoln Center in New York, March 24. And 1 week after it opens in LA, and it also opens in Sweden, and then a little bit later in Canada. And we hope to bring it to theaters in UK as well a little later this spring. So I hope as many people as possible would like to see the film.
Well, your passport's going to get a lot of use over the next 6 months. Kasper, thank you very much for spending time with us. One last question. Do you know if Lee Morgan and Albert Ayler ever shared the stage or studio together?
To my knowledge, they never did. I don't think so. They lived. They might have met also because they both played at Slugs quite a lot. The special club in New York, the Lower East Side, where this tragic event occurred that evening in 1972. But that was a very popular hangout where a lot of the real cats were hanging. And the great music were going on there almost every night. And Albert also used to play there, and Lee played a lot from like mid 60s and forward. So I'm sure they met there at some point. If they were friends, they lived probably kind of parallel lives, I must say. But also I would add what is special with this film, of course, is that, and what I realized when making this is that talking to those people that are still alive, and that was there the last night and so on. That night when Lee was shot, is that what happened is that, of course, they lost Lee. He died instantly, but they also lost Helen. They lost two good friends at one night, and it's a very traumatic thing to happen, because they were as good friends with Helen, and they knew what she meant to him. And I think that is something, because I want to add that, of course, I'm making this film because I to highlight Lee's as an artist, because he really needs to be more well known generally. for his fantastic music. But I also thought, and I'm going back to what I said from the beginning, that I didn't know. I only know that Helen was the woman that shot him, and that's how she'd been defined generally. And I didn't know. I think that it's she deserves also to be known for helping Lee back. So and in the film, that is a very special thing. I mean, all the people around, they have strong, like, double feelings, very confused still about this, that one of their best friends is being shot by another of their best friends, if you understand what I'm saying. It's very traumatic thing that happened there.
Well, thank you very much for spending time with us again, Kasper. I know you're on the press junket for this film. Again, I want to encourage folks to check out I Called Him Morgan in New York, premiering theatrically March 24th. A week later in Los Angeles, and then I believe up to Canada and around the world. Make sure to check out I Called Him Morgan. Google it, add it to your Facebook, and then wherever you're at in the world, you'll see some dates and some locations on where you could see this fantastic film. Again, thank you very much, Kasper.
Thank you.
Cheers.